So listen, I got to be honest with you. I've always been excited about social justice. I was kind of a nerd like that as a kid. These were things that my aunts and uncles planted in me and my parents nurtured it. And so being passionate about social justice has been sort of part of my fiber. However, once I began working in this space, I realized, Sam, that we have a lot of gaps in our information, a lot of gaps in the knowledge that we should have access to that can help us be even more effective at battling issues like police brutality. Can you talk with us about the role of data? It doesn't seem very sexy. It doesn't seem very exciting, but data, these numbers, these stats, how do they play a role in combating police brutality?
So first of all, as you mentioned, there's a huge gap around data when it comes to understanding policing and police violence in this country. So the federal government can tell you how much rainfall there was going back 100 years in rural Wisconsin. But even to this day, they don't have a comprehensive database where they can tell you how many people were killed by the police or even harmed by the police last year or the year before that. And so that was sort of the landscape when I got into this work in the context of the Ferguson uprising in 2014. Trying to better understand this issue, the first thing I tried to figure out was, where's the data so that we could begin to use the data to answer a couple of key questions. So number one, how often are people killed or otherwise harmed by the police? Where is this happening at higher or lower rates? Where are things getting better? And if we can understand where things are getting better, where the numbers are decreasing over time substantially, then hopefully we can get at some of what the actual solutions can look like that we can scale across the country. But none of that was possible back then because the data simply was not being collected by the government. And so that's where I stepped up and started to collect this data, working through local media reports, through public records requests to agencies across the country, looking at obituaries, looking at a host of other databases, and pulling together what ultimately has become the most comprehensive database of people killed by police in the United States, which is Mapping Police Violence at mappingpoliceviolence.us. And then now expanding that into other aspects of policing as well. So data on non-fatal force, data on police accountability and civilian complaints, and a host of other metrics that have now become the Police Scorecard project. So that's sort of been the journey. It's been 7+ years of data collection, of analysis, and then more importantly, taking that data and using it to support local organizers to push for change, to make the case for why this issue is a serious issue, why it's widespread, why it's an issue in folks' own backyards. Back in 2014, there was a lot of doubt, particularly among policymakers in white communities, certainly, that this was even an issue. They would say this was an isolated incident. They would say Freddie Gray was an isolated incident, or Mike Brown was an isolated incident, or Alton Sterling was an isolated incident. And we heard this again and again and again. But when we look at the numbers, the data was a powerful tool pushing back against that narrative and showing, in fact, in any given year, police kill about 1,100 people. Last year, it was 1,134. This year already, they've killed more than 200 people. So an average of about 3 people every day are killed by the police. For every person killed, there are 2 people who are shot but survive by police, and about 55,000 people who are hospitalized because of police. So this is a huge issue. It's widespread. It's not limited to any one city or state. This is in all 50 states, in every city. And Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed than white people.
Okay. See, this is why we have data scientists, because you just rattled that all off like you were ordering something at a restaurant. But that's what data can do. It gives you a grasp of the magnitude of the problem. But I got to ask you about something. You started out by saying the government can tell us how much rainfall we got last year. They can measure the level of toxins in the air such that if you live in a community where there's a lot of fires, for example, a lot of wildfires, they will tell you this is a day where you need to put on your mask. Not because of the Rona, but because the air is bad for other reasons. There are so many data points that our government is proactively seeking to not just catalog, but to measure and to then build policy around how to navigate dangerous spikes in harmful data, for example. So if you live in a community that's got really bad water, and the data is there, and they tell you that you might not want to move there. You might want to move to a community that's got clean water. Data gives us information, not just for the sake of knowing, but so it will help us to adjust our behavior going forward. 2014, the government having had all of these data gathering capacities and functions in all of these different areas up until 2014, there was no comprehensive data set that was looking at the numbers you just rattled off. 3 people killed by police per day. For every person shot, 2 are hospitalized, 55,000. I mean, there was nobody gathering that from our federal government in any meaningful way. Is that right?
That's correct. In fact, even since then, like that was 2014. In 2016, back under the Obama administration, and back then FBI Director James Comey announced that they would start creating a database to track killings by the police. They created a use of force data collection program that was supposed to do this and fix that issue. But in fact, even to this day, that program has not collected data from more than about 60% of the nation's law enforcement agencies. And because of that, it's expected to actually shut down this year because not enough law enforcement agencies contributed data to the program. So the government even announced a program to try to do this and failed. Meanwhile, they're collecting data from many more agencies on arrests. They've got crime data they're collecting from those same agencies that they're getting that data reported. But when it comes to data on the police, crimes committed by the police, violence committed by the police, suddenly they're non-responsive and non-reporting agencies, so much so that the federal government had to close down the program.
The federal government, which funds most of these agencies, so the federal government, which gives these agencies, these police precincts, these reporting agencies money, has only been able to gather data from about 60% of them. And so because of their failure to secure sufficient data from the agencies that they pay for, they're going to shut down the one data gathering program that's looking at this material. It seems to me, Sam, I mean, feels like somebody doesn't really want to count what's happening here. Is that, I mean, maybe that's just my interpretation, but I'm not a data scientist. What say you? Because from my vantage point, they all want to know how bad the police violence problem is in this country. Is there something that I'm not missing?
They don't, because I mean, you can see this in the policies that they've adopted. So not only did they not obtain data from a whole host of agencies, but the data that they did collect, they decided not to make public. So they're sitting on some data.
Whoa.
They are sitting on some data, but they've decided not to make that public until about 80% of agencies participate. And they knew that they wouldn't get 80% of agencies to participate. So they designed a policy that prohibited them from even sharing the data that they were collecting. And then now they're shutting down the program, so it'll never see the light of day. So
can you remind us the name of this program for those who would want to?
Use of force data collection program from the FBI was running the use of force data collection program. And during the Trump administration, they adopted this internal rule that they weren't going to share the data until 80% of agencies participated in the program. That has never happened. It didn't happen up until now, and now they're going to close the program. So that's the state of the federal data collection program. So there are 2 places that you should reach out. One, at the federal level, you should call your member of Congress, and in particular, call your senator. Because they've held up a whole host of bills that would have strengthened the government's data collection capacity and made some of these programs mandatory. And then secondly, your state legislators. So there are now about 20 states that have adopted their own use of force data collection program that are, in some places like in California, in Texas, they're reporting much better data on this issue than they had been doing previously. So there's hope to do this at the state level, even if the federal government isn't yet stepping up to take action.
Okay, so y'all, that's the first power work assignment for the day. We know that when it comes to police violence, we need to be calling our senators and member of Congress, which means you should be using your 5 Calls app, which you should already have downloaded on your phone. And for those of you who do not, the very first power work assignment we'd ever given was to get your senators and Congress members and state elected officials' phone numbers and contact information in your devices. So this is the assignment. We are reaching out to those elected officials. We are letting them know, Sam, is this correct, that we want them to maintain and protect the use of force data collection and report that? Now, that might work if I'm in a state where this is already happening, but if I'm in a state where they're not already gathering this data, is my message to my elected officials, why the heck aren't you gathering this data, and where's the program to get that done?
Exactly. And not
Okay.
only that, but they should be more ambitious. So, we already are collecting the data on people who are killed by the police. We found a way to get that information without the federal government. But there's information that is even harder to get, and that's around non-fatal force, because it's less likely to get reported in the media. It's less likely to be something that is trackable nationwide without a formal program requiring that to be reported. Now, in New Jersey, for example, they require every law enforcement agency, they have about 100% participation rate. Every law enforcement agency reports data on every use of force incident to the state, and the state publishes that on a weekly basis with the officer's name and every use of force incident that happened throughout that state in New Jersey. So it's possible to do this, right? There's no reason, there's no excuse for 49 states not to report that kind of information. So that should be the standard. Every use of force incident should be reported. The information on the officers should be reported so we can know which officers are using more force and which are not. And that all ought to be able to be made public in real time.
That's fantastic. So be like New Jersey is the message. I've never said those words before, but hey, shout out to New Jersey. We love you. Be like New Jersey. New Jersey is leading the way. They're also doing some good things with cannabis, but we appreciate that they are leading the way in this effort. So y'all, when you call, you have a model. A lot of folks are going to push back and say, well, we can't do that. Well, why not? New Jersey doing it? Let's get it done. So